Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about Isaiah 53. Starting in verse 2, it says, "He grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain, like one from whom people hide their faces. He was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away, yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors." So this passage is talking about Jesus, and when it mentions how it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer, even though Jesus is still Lord, they are talking about the God, the Father, Lord, and then Jesus, also Lord. So you have to remember that there are three persons, one essence of God. So sometimes that can be kind of confusing, but we can see here that it's pretty clear that they're talking about Jesus and how it was the Lord's will, the Father's will, to send his son to die for us and to bear our sins, basically, and our iniquities. And he had to take up that pain and suffering by dying on the cross. So this is a great passage because it is showing how the Lord was rejected by mankind. He was oppressed. He was cut off from the land of the living. He came humbly as a servant. He didn't come as like this righteous, haughty king. He came as a servant, and he came to serve, right? So that's what makes Jesus different than many other religious leaders or other gods of other religions. Jesus came in a very different way, and that's what makes Christianity so unique. And so he came humbly and he came to serve us, even though we do not deserve it. And that's the thing with Christianity, is we do not deserve what the Lord did. We are sinful and we are fallen and we do terrible, terrible things. But God, being loving, actually sent his son as a sacrifice to save us from having to die that death that Jesus did for us, and saving us from having to go to eternal punishment. So we have done nothing to be deserving of this. Other religions are kind of like based off of human merit. What can you do? What can you do to make yourself better? How many good works can you do to make yourself better, or to look better in the eyes of their God or whatever? But with the Lord, he says, you can't do enough to be good enough in my eyes. So I'm going to send my son to save you, because I know that you cannot do enough. So he sent the sinless, spotless lamb that we see in verse 7. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter. And this is kind of gives you an image, like this is the lamb. This is a pure, spotless lamb. He was sinless. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and he had no deceit in his mouth. He did not even open his mouth. He said nothing. He was quiet. If you were to put yourself in Jesus' shoes right now, and you were being led like a lamb to the slaughter, and you knew that you were going to be crucified on a cross, I don't think that you'd be quiet. I wouldn't be quiet if I knew that I hadn't done anything wrong and I was being convicted of what the death penalty. and I knew that I had done nothing wrong, I wouldn't be quiet like a lamb to the slaughter. But Jesus knew that he came for a purpose, and so that's what makes him stand out. And it really does show how much he loves us. He literally had to go through an immense amount of torture and persecution while on earth. And yeah, it shows how Jesus is such a loving God. And he took up our pain, he bore our suffering, he was pierced for our transgressions. So it's just a good reminder that Jesus is not just any religious leader, but he is God. And Jesus, being innocent, took on the punishment that would have been for the guilty to save us.